But we begin with the results starting to come in tonight in that closely watched gubernatorial race in Virginia. On Balance host Leland Vittert is live for us this evening with the very latest. And Leland, this one is close right now.
Well, that's sort of the stunning part, Marnie, is that it's not that close. It was supposed to be not close for Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat, but now it is not close for Glenn Youngkin, the Republican. We are witnessing a 9.0 political earthquake if these numbers hold. Right now, roughly 72% of the vote in, and Glenn Youngkin is up by a full 10 percentage points. Remember, Joe Biden won Virginia by 10 percentage points. We're talking about a 20-point swing from Republicans to Democrats in just 12 months. And it all came down that Glenn Youngkin was able to seize on the anger of parents in suburban, affluent Washington, D.C. over the issue of education. Not math classes being taught, but the issues of critical race theory, the issue of transgender bathrooms, mask mandates, and the power of teacher unions. All progressive issues that Glenn Youngkin got up and started talking about on the stump in August. And tonight we are witnessing an incredible moment. And you can see the crowd that is now filled in at Youngkin headquarters. We have not called the race. The Associated Press has not projected a winner here. But as these numbers continue to come in, Terry McAuliffe is going to have to pull an inside royal flush in order to win this thing. And right now, if Youngkin wins this by the full 10 or 12 points, it's sort of impossible to understate, or impossible, I should say, to overstate just how big the change is going to be in Washington politically, as moderate Democrats in what they thought were safe districts, and certainly Democrats thought that the Virginia governor's mansion was a safe place, now will wake up tomorrow morning feeling very differently, Marnie.
Leland, let's add to that, because this is an important race in terms of the national political landscape. Walk folks through what this could mean if Youngkin does continue to carry this lead that's widening.
Well, Youngkin has blazed a new path for Republicans. He is not a moderate. It is not a moderate Republican path, but it is a path separate from Donald Trump. And Glenn Youngkin would not say the word Donald Trump, whether he was asked about it. He wouldn't say it in a stump speech. He would not address President Trump by name. He said, I am here for Virginians. And somehow he was able to walk the political tightrope of embracing MAGA ideology, of, quote, putting Virginia first, but at the same time not embrace Donald Trump. And that was so key in the key counties, because there are counties that President Biden beat Trump in by a 2-to-1 margin that Youngkin is tied in right now. What that means is that in places for Republicans around the country where President Trump was unpopular with suburban soccer moms and college-educated white men, the style in which President Trump tweeted and talked was not popular, there's going to be a whole lot of Republicans now who say, look, there is a path for me in which I do not have to embrace Donald Trump, but I can still be a conservative. And Democrats that I've talked to right now are talking about a real reckoning. Can we be as woke in even somewhat blue states like Virginia as Terry McAuliffe tried to be? And at least right now, as we look at these numbers, it's just not holding for Democrats. And that's going to have huge implications for President Biden's domestic agenda. This is very similar, as I'm talking to both Republicans and Democrats, to what we saw in 2009, the lashback to President Obama's election. And that was what the election in Virginia is what brought about the Tea Party, what brought about the change in the House leadership. This is really the beginnings of something pretty wild that's happening in Washington, and then that will then transcend the American political landscape.
Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.